The kid lifted the lid and pulled his head back like something had flown out at him. "Sir, this is this is old uniforms and papers and stuff. We don't really take this kind of thing." Gerald Donovan stood on the other side of the counter. 80 years old, his veteran's ball cap pulled low, his left hand steady on the wooden handle of the footlocker because his right hand didn't work right anymore after the stroke, and watched a 25-year-old make a face at 79 years of his father's life. "Those are my father's papers," Gerald said. "Yeah, no, I get that, but look, we sell stuff. We don't really do paper. Paper doesn't move. Old uniforms don't move. Footlocker itself is maybe worth $20 as a piece of furniture. I could do 40 for the whole thing, honestly, just because the box is in decent shape." $40. For the Army footlocker that had come home from Europe with Staff Sergeant Patrick Donovan in November of 1945. For the locker that contained Patrick's Eisenhower jacket, his dog tags, his Bronze Star citation, 8 campaign letters he'd written to his wife Ellen between 1943 and 1945, a folded silk map of France, a German pistol he'd taken off a surrendering officer outside Rennes in April of 1945, a small leather-bound address book with the names and hometowns of every man in his platoon, and a photograph of a young French girl holding a loaf of bread with "Pour les Américains" written on the back in pencil. $40 for all of it. Let me tell you about Gerald Donovan and his father's footlocker. Gerald was born in 1945 in Worcester, Massachusetts, 6 months before his father came home from the war. He was the first of 4 Donovan children. His father, Patrick Donovan, had been drafted in 1942 at the age of 24. Patrick had grown up in Worcester in an Irish Catholic family on the east side, the oldest of 7, and had been working as a mechanic at a garage on Lincoln Street when the draft notice came. He left the garage, kissed his new wife Ellen goodbye, and reported for basic training at Fort Devens on a Tuesday morning in November. Patrick was assigned to the 26th Infantry Division, the Yankee Division, a Massachusetts National Guard unit that had been activated for the war. After training in Tennessee and Louisiana, the 26th was shipped to England in August of 1944, and in September they crossed the Channel to France. Patrick's war began at the Moselle River in October. He was a staff sergeant by then, promoted twice in combat. He fought through Lorraine. He was at Metz. He was in the Saar. And in December, when the Germans launched their final offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, the 26th Division was one of the units Patton turned around and marched north in the most famous movement of the war. Patrick was in those woods. He was at Wiltz. He helped relieve the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. He was at places whose names most Americans have forgotten, but that men like Patrick Donovan never forgot. Rambruch, Eschdorf, Arsdorf. It was 40 degrees below zero. Men froze to death in their foxholes. Patrick had his left earlobe taken off by shrapnel from a German mortar round and didn't even notice until a medic pointed it out 3 hours later. He kept fighting. His division lost 10,701 men, killed, wounded, or missing, in the Battle of the Bulge. Patrick survived. He kept going. He was in Germany by March. He was at the Rhine. He was in the final push into the Saar and into southern Germany. He saw the camps. He didn't talk about the camps. Ever. For the rest of his life, the word camp would not come out of Patrick Donovan's mouth, and if someone else said it in his presence, he would leave the room. The war ended in May of 1945. Patrick came home in November. He walked up the steps of the triple-decker on Lincoln Street in Worcester, where Ellen had moved in with his parents during the war, and Ellen opened the door and was holding a baby boy she had named after Patrick's father. The baby was Gerald. Patrick was 27 years old. He had spent just over a year in combat across Europe. He brought home a wooden footlocker, Army issue, olive drab, with his name and serial number stenciled on the lid in yellow paint that had already started to fade. Inside the footlocker was everything he'd kept: his Eisenhower jacket with the 26th Division shoulder patch, and his staff sergeant stripes, his dog tags, his Bronze Star citation, 8 letters he'd written home. Ellen had saved them and put them back in the footlocker when he came home. a silk escape map of France that the army had issued to every soldier going to the continent, a German Walther P.38 pistol he had taken off a Wehrmacht officer at Reims during the surrender negotiations, a leather-bound address book with every man in his platoon, and a photograph. The photograph was of a young French girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, standing in a village square in Lorraine, holding a loaf of bread and smiling shyly at the camera. On the back, in pencil, someone had written, "Pour les Américains," for the Americans. Patrick put the footlocker in the attic of the triple-decker on the day he came home. He closed the lid. He climbed back down the attic stairs, and he never opened it again for the rest of his life. Not once, not for any reason, not to show his children, not to tell a story, not to explain. Patrick Donovan came home from the war, closed the lid on the locker, and locked the war inside it. He got his job back at the garage on Lincoln Street. He and Ellen had 3 more children after Gerald. He went to Mass every Sunday. He coached Little League. He drank beer on Saturday nights with the other men from the parish. And he never, ever, ever talked about what was in that footlocker or what had happened in Europe. Patrick passed in 1987. Lung cancer. 28 years at the garage breathing exhaust fumes had finally caught up with him. He was 69 years old. He died at St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester with Ellen and all 4 kids around the bed. His last words, according to Gerald, were, "Tell your mother I'm sorry about the kitchen sink." Patrick had been meaning to fix a leak under the kitchen sink for 3 weeks. He was a practical man, even at the end. Ellen passed in 1994. After her death, the family sold the triple-decker on Lincoln Street. During the clean-out, Gerald's sister Maureen brought the footlocker down from the attic and asked if anyone wanted it. Gerald's brothers didn't. Gerald took it. It had been in his garage in Worcester ever since, then moved with him when he retired and moved to a condo in Leominster. Gerald was an accountant. He'd worked for the same firm, Brewer and Associates in Worcester, for 41 years. He'd married a woman named Carol in 1969 who had taught 3rd grade for 32 years before retiring. They had 2 children, both grown, both in Boston. Carol had passed in 2019 from complications from a broken hip that wouldn't heal. Gerald had a stroke in 2022. Mild, the doctor said. He was 80 years old. It left his right hand with a tremor and occasional weakness that made writing difficult. A cruel irony for a man who had spent 41 years with a mechanical pencil in that hand. He recovered most of his mobility. He could still drive. He could still take care of himself. But doing so took more out of him than it used to, and his monthly expenses had started creeping up past what his fixed income could handle. His Social Security was $1,980. His pension from Brewer and Associates was $1,140, total $3,120. The condo fee was $420. The condo mortgage was $740. He'd refinanced in 2015 for reasons that made sense at the time and didn't now. Utilities, insurance, groceries, gas, Medicare supplement, prescriptions. The prescriptions alone were $280 a month because the blood thinner they put him on after the stroke was expensive. After everything, Gerald had about $50 left over, some months less. The problem was his teeth, the same as so many old men Gerald's age. He needed a bridge on the right side, where 3 molars had given up over the last 2 years. The dentist said it would be $5,400. Medicare didn't cover it. Gerald had $720 in savings. He chewed on the left side of his mouth now, which had caused the muscles on that side of his face to ache, and the dentist said he was at risk of damaging the joint if he didn't address the problem. His son David was an engineer at Raytheon. His daughter, Patricia, was a lawyer. Both of them would have paid for the dental work without a second thought. Gerald wasn't going to ask. He'd worked 41 years as an accountant, and his children had both gone to college on the money he'd earned with his mechanical pencil, and he was not about to ask his educated, successful adult children for a $1,000 dental bill. He had his pride. Pride is what men of Gerald's generation have. instead of a financial safety net? He thought about what he could sell. The answer, after he eliminated everything he actually needed to live, was the Footlocker. He had never opened it. He had inherited it from his father, who had never reopened it. In 80 years of combined father-son ownership, that Footlocker had been closed for 77 of them. Gerald figured it probably had some old army uniforms in it, maybe a helmet, maybe a bayonet. Veteran stuff. He knew vaguely that there was a market for military collectibles. Maybe the whole thing was worth a couple $100, maybe enough for the dentist's down payment. He put the Footlocker in the back of his 2011 Toyota Camry and drove to Patriot Pawn on Main Street in Leominster. The kid behind the counter was named Ryan Halloran, 25, short sandy hair, a fade on the sides, a black store polo with the shop logo, dark cargo pants, black sneakers. A name tag on a lanyard that said, Ryan, sales floor. He was polite enough. He said, ma'am, and sir, without prompting. But he was 25, and to Ryan, an old army Footlocker was a wooden box full of moth-eaten uniforms and yellowed paper. The shop didn't deal in paper or fabric. That was his honest assessment. Gerald set the Footlocker on the counter. Ryan opened the lid. He pulled his head back slightly. The smell of old wool and paper and cedar and 79 years hit him. He saw the folded Eisenhower jacket on top. Yeah, no, this is just... We don't really take this kind of thing. Gerald looked at the Footlocker. At the top of his father's jacket, the wool still olive drab after all these years, the Yankee Division patch still sewn to the shoulder. At the edge of a letter sticking out from beneath the jacket, at the corner of what looked like a photograph. He hadn't actually looked inside the Footlocker in 37 years, not since he'd carried it out of his parents' attic. He'd never opened it. He started to close the lid. What happened next changed everything. Subscribe to Hidden Worth and tell me in the comments, what's the oldest thing your family has kept without ever opening? The bell over the door rang. A man walked in, late 50s, tall, close-cropped silver hair, a trimmed silver mustache, wearing a dark gray wool blazer over a white polo shirt, jeans, brown Oxfords. He carried a small leather briefcase and moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent most of his life in uniform and hadn't quite shaken it. His name was Colonel, retired, Douglas Thornton. He was 59 years old, a retired U.S. Army officer who had served 28 years in military intelligence and logistics. After retirement, he had become a certified military collectibles appraiser, specializing in World War II American items. He worked with Heritage Auctions, Rock Island Auction Company, and the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Patriot Pawn's owner, a veteran himself, had Thornton on call for anything military that came through the shop. He paid Thornton a flat retainer and kept his card on a corkboard in the back. Ryan had texted his boss a photo of the Footlocker when Gerald first walked in. His boss had texted back, "Wait, calling Thornton." Thornton was 90 minutes away in Nashua, New Hampshire. He dropped what he was doing and drove down. He set his briefcase on the counter. He saw the open Footlocker. He saw the Eisenhower jacket. He saw the shoulder patch. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said quietly, "May I?" "Please," Gerald said. Colonel Thornton took a pair of white cotton gloves from his briefcase and put them on. He lifted the Eisenhower jacket out of the Footlocker carefully, holding it by the shoulders, and laid it flat on the counter. He studied the shoulder patch, the 26th Yankee Division monogram, a blue YD on an olive diamond. He studied the staff sergeant chevrons on the sleeves. He turned the jacket over and looked at the inside of the collar, where hand-sewn thread held a small cloth tag. He read the name on the tag. P. Donovan. He looked at Gerald. "Your father was in the 26th Infantry Division?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant Patrick Donovan." "Which regiment?" He never said exactly. He wouldn't talk about any of it. I know he was at the Battle of the Bulge because his discharge papers said so. Thornton nodded slowly. He reached back into the Footlocker. He lifted out the next item, the leather-bound address book. He opened it carefully. The pages contained handwritten names, hometowns, and a few notes. Thornton turned a page. Another. He found what he was looking for. "Your father was in the 104th Infantry Regiment," he said. "I can tell from this list. These are men from the 104th. They were at Arsdorf, at Wiltz, at the relief of Bastogne. The 104th took some of the heaviest casualties in the division during the Bulge." He set the address book down. He reached in again. He lifted out the Bronze Star citation. He read it slowly. His expression didn't change, but something happened in his eyes. "Your father was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device for actions near Wiltz, Luxembourg, on December 27, 1944. The citation describes him advancing alone across open ground under machine gun fire to silence a German position that had pinned down his platoon. He took out the position with grenades and small arms fire, allowing his platoon to advance. He was awarded the medal in February of 1945. Gerald's hand went to his mouth. "I didn't know. He never told us. He never showed us." "A lot of men didn't," Thornton said quietly. "The ones who did the most rarely talked about it." He reached into the footlocker again. He lifted out the silk escape map. He unfolded it carefully. France, in silk. The kind of map Army Air Corps and special operators carried in case they were shot down or cut off. He refolded it and set it aside. He lifted out the letters. 8 letters. Tied together with a piece of brown string that had aged to a soft caramel color. He didn't open them. He didn't need to. Combat letters from an enlisted man to his wife, written from the front, undocumented until this moment, along with the soldier's Bronze Star citation and platoon list, are historically significant documents. They belong with the division's archives or in a museum. He reached in again. He lifted out something Gerald hadn't known was there. A German Walther P-38 pistol, in a leather holster. The metal had aged, but the piece was intact. Thornton held it in his gloved hands carefully. He examined the markings on the slide. Walter, the serial number, the Nazi eagle stamp, the date code. He looked at the holster. "Your father surrendered this pistol when he was mustered out. He would have had to, but he appears to have paperwork with it." There was a small folded document tucked into the holster. Thornton unfolded it with gloved fingers. "This is an official War Department capture paper dated April 1945. It confirms that the pistol was taken from a German officer during the surrender negotiations at Reims, and that your father was authorized to keep it as a war trophy. He had it stamped and registered through official Army channels. That's rare. Most trophy weapons went home undocumented. Yours is fully papered." Ryan was standing very still behind the counter. His mouth was slightly open. Thornton reached into the footlocker one last time. He lifted out the photograph, the little French girl with the loaf of bread. He turned it over. He read the penciled inscription, "Pour les Américains." He looked at it for a long time. Then he set it down on the counter next to everything else. He removed his gloves. He stood up straight. He looked at Gerald. "Mr. Donovan, I need to tell you what you have here. This footlocker contains, complete and intact, the personal effects of a decorated 26th Yankee Division infantry soldier who fought through the Battle of the Bulge, was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor, took a documented war trophy through official channels, and brought home a complete personal archive, including letters, a platoon roster, and a civilian photograph with handwritten dedication in French. Individually, each of these items is a significant military artifact. Together, as an unbroken, never disturbed, original soldier's footlocker with full provenance, this is a museum-quality archive." He took a breath. "I cannot give you an exact value without a full written appraisal, but I can tell you that the Bronze Star citation alone, with the Valor device and the documented action at Wiltz, is worth between $4,000 and $6,000 to a collector. The Eisenhower jacket with the Yankee Division patch and Staff Sergeant stripes is worth between $800 and $1,500. The captured Walther P-38 with original War Department capture papers is worth between $3,000 and $5,000. The letters are worth whatever a historian or a museum is willing to pay for them, which could be significant. The platoon address book is historically invaluable." He paused. "But the real value is the whole thing together. An intact, untouched, documented 26th Division footlocker from a Bronze Star recipient who fought at the Bulge at a specialized military auction as a complete archive. The estimated value is between $60,000 and $90,000. I would put the midpoint at approximately $72,000. A museum acquisition could go higher." $72,000. Gerald sat down. He didn't remember anyone pushing a chair toward him, but he was sitting. His right hand was trembling visibly, and he didn't try to hide it. Ryan Halloran was looking at the footlocker the way you look at something you've just realized you almost damaged beyond repair. Gerald was thinking about his father. He was thinking about Patrick Donovan carrying this box home in November of 1945 and climbing the attic stairs in the triple-decker and closing the lid and not opening it again for 42 years. He was thinking about Patrick sitting in the kitchen on Lincoln Street eating Ellen's pot roast and never saying a word about a French girl in a village square or a German pistol on a desk at Rames or a mortar round that took off part of his ear. He was thinking about the Bronze Star his father had never shown them, the Bronze Star Patrick Donovan had received for silencing a German machine gun position alone, across open ground, under fire at Wiltz, Luxembourg, on December 27, 1944. "He never told us," Gerald said quietly. "He never told us anything." Thornton put his hand on the edge of the counter. "Mr. Donovan, the men who came back from that war kept their stories inside because the stories were too heavy to carry out loud. Your father wasn't hiding anything from you. He was protecting you from it. And he left it all here in this footlocker so that someday, when someone like me opened it, the story would come out." Gerald wiped his right eye with his left hand because his right hand couldn't do that reliably anymore. "I'd like you to help me place it properly," he said, "the way my father would have wanted." "I would be honored," Thornton said. Ryan cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said—" Gerald looked at him. He wasn't angry. He was 80 years old, and he had just learned his father had been a hero, and he didn't have room for anger. "Son, my father was a quiet man who ate dinner in that kitchen for 42 years and never told any of us what he did. And you looked at his footlocker and you said $40. I know. I'm not mad at you, son. I'm just telling you. There's a difference between a box of junk and a box that's been waiting 80 years for someone to look inside. If you can't tell the difference, call someone who can, that's all." Ryan nodded. His lanyard hung still against his chest. Gerald stood up. He wanted to pick up the footlocker and carry it out himself, the way his father had carried it up the attic stairs in 1945. His right hand wouldn't let him. Ryan offered to carry it to the car. Gerald let him. Let me tell you what happened. Gerald called Colonel Thornton the following Monday. Thornton drove back to Leominster that weekend and spent the entire day at Gerald's condo, going through the footlocker carefully, photographing every item, and building a full written inventory. Together they read Patrick's letters to Ellen for the first time. Gerald had never read them. The letters were quiet, practical, full of love and longing, and almost completely silent about what Patrick was actually experiencing. The letter from December 30th, 1944, 3 days after the action at Wiltz, said only, "Ellen, it is very cold here and I'm doing what I can. I will see you before the cherries come in. Yours, Pat." The footlocker was consigned to Rock Island Auction Company for their premier military auction. The catalog entry was 8 pages long. It included a photograph of Patrick Donovan in his Army uniform from 1944. Gerald found it in a box at his sister Maureen's house. It included the Bronze Star citation, a photograph of every letter, a photograph of the French girl with her loaf of bread, and a brief essay Thornton wrote about the 26th Yankee Division and the action at Wiltz. The Yankee Division Veterans Association requested a copy of Patrick's platoon address book for their archives. Thornton made high-resolution scans and sent them at no cost. The auction was held in the spring. The pre-sale estimate had been $62,000 to $95,000. The final hammer price was $84,500. The winning bidder was the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, acquiring the archive for their permanent World War II collection. After commissions, Gerald received just over $69,800. He paid the dentist $5,400 the next week. He paid off the remaining condo mortgage, $38,200, in a single check. For the first time since 1975, he didn't have a mortgage. He had the condo fee, but nothing else over his head. He had the tremor in his right hand looked at by a specialist at Mass General, which his primary care had been recommending for a year. He got his hearing aids fixed. He set up a $10,000 trust for each of his 5 grandchildren. He sent his son David and his daughter Patricia each $5,000 with a note that said, "From your grandfather Patrick. He was at the Bulge. He was awarded the Bronze Star. I want you to know this about him because he never told us, and I never got to know it myself until this year." David called the evening he got the check and note. "Dad, I didn't know any of this." "Neither did I, son," Gerald said. "Neither did I." Patricia called the next morning. She asked Gerald to read her the Bronze Star citation over the phone. Gerald read it. When he was done, Patricia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm bringing the kids up this weekend. I want them to hear all of this." She did. The grandchildren came to the condo that Saturday. Gerald had laid out photographs and had a copy of the auction catalog. He told them everything he had learned from Colonel Thornton, about the 26th Yankee Division, about Wiltz, about the 101st at Bastogne, about what their great-grandfather had done on December 27th, 1944. The grandchildren listened. The oldest one, a 13-year-old boy named Patrick, named after his great-grandfather, asked the questions Gerald had never thought to ask his own father when he was alive. The Footlocker itself was kept by the Army Heritage Center. Gerald drove to Carlisle, Pennsylvania the following year for the opening of a small exhibit. The Footlocker was displayed open, just as it had looked when Colonel Thornton had lifted the Eisenhower jacket out of it for the first time. The placard read, "Personal Archive of Staff Sergeant Patrick J. Donovan, 26th Infantry Division, 104th Infantry Regiment, donated by the Donovan family of Worcester, Massachusetts, Bronze Star with Valor, Wiltz, Luxembourg, December 27th, 1944. He said, 'I will see you before the cherries come in.'" Gerald stood in front of the display case for a long time. He held his veteran's ball cap in his left hand because his right hand wasn't steady. He looked at the French girl's photograph. He looked at his father's jacket. He looked at the Bronze Star. His father had been a hero for 42 years while Gerald was growing up. And Gerald had never known. Because Patrick never said. Because Patrick had closed the lid in 1945 and kept it closed. But the lid was open now. A kid in a pawn shop said $40 for the whole thing. He didn't know what was inside. Nobody did. If this story reminded you that worth isn't always obvious, subscribe to Hidden Worth. We have more stories like this one, and every single one of them will surprise you. Because some things have hidden worth.